Rain in the Face knew the truth about what happened at the Little Bighorn better than anyone. While the Americans told their heroic tales about Custer's last stand and the survival of the men on Reno Hill, he knew the gruesome reality, that many of Custer's men died horrible deaths, and the rest of the 7th Cavalry could have easily suffered the same fate. He knew this because he was the most brutal warrior of them all, with one of the most shocking details of what really happened during Custer's last stand. Rain in the Face was a member of the Hunkpapa band of the Sioux, the same band as Sitting Bull. For 10 years he'd been fighting the Americans. A veteran of several raids and open battles with the white men, he was an accomplished warrior who had earned his respect entirely through his feats on the battlefield. He had also spent months in American captivity at Fort Abraham Lincoln, where he had been tortured and abused personally by none other than Captain Tom Custer. Rain in the Face's chance for revenge would come suddenly and violently. On the afternoon of June 25, 1876, he was enjoying a feast at a friend's lodge when he heard the first signs of battle. "While I was eating my meat, we heard the war cry," he recounted many years later. Sioux scouts had discovered Custer's approach several hours before he arrived, but they did not know when or where he'd strike. Panic was already spreading through the camp. The distant echo of gunfire from the south confirmed they were under attack. This, of course, was Major Marcus Reno's attack. With 3 companies of the 7th Cavalry, Reno's job was to stage an initial attack on the southern edge of the camp to distract the Native Americans while Custer came around from the north. Unknown to the Americans, Reno's attack was aimed directly at the Hunkpapa camp where Sitting Bull and other important leaders were encamped. They were kicking the hornet's nest at its most vulnerable point, and triggered an overwhelming reaction. Thousands of Sioux and Cheyenne warriors had leapt into action to protect their spiritual leader, far outnumbering Reno's meager 150 men. Rain in the Face was eager to join them. He rushed to his teepee, grabbed his rifle and bow, and mounted his horse ready to charge. We know that Custer's attack came about 45 minutes after Reno's. We don't know how long it took for Rain in the Face to realize Reno was attacking, or how long it took to grab his weapons, but it must have been close to 45 minutes, because Rain in the Face never joined the Reno fight. Before he could leave, Sioux scouts spotted more American troops riding over the bluffs on the far side of the river. Custer's command had arrived, unaware that they were marching into a disaster. Rain in the Face said that he and the rest of the warriors still in the camp turned their horses and headed for the river ford, where they predicted the new troops would try to cross. As they rode, Rain in the Face remembered seeing an unusual sight and called out to his men, "Behold, there is a woman among us. Let no man hide behind her garment." The woman's name was Tashinamani, or Moving Robe Woman. She was one of the few female Sioux warriors in the battle. She had lost her younger brother at the Battle of the Rosebud a week earlier, and was eager for revenge on the Americans. Whenever a woman joined the battle, it always made the male warriors fight harder to impress her, Rain in the Face said. According to his account, some of Custer's men had already dismounted on the cliffs across the river fired down into the camp. The rest of Custer's men began their descent down the bluffs, where Rain in the Face and the rest of the warriors rushed to meet them. Rain in the Face never mentions Custer's men actually crossing the river. Native accounts disagree on this. Some, like White Cow Bull, say Custer tried crossing the river and attacked the camp before being driven back. Others, like Chief Gull, say the Native Americans rushed over the river to meet him on the far side, and he never made it to the river at all. There are even some that claim Custer was killed crossing the river. Rain in the Face only says that the Sioux and Cheyenne reached the far side of the river where they engaged the Americans. As usual, the Sioux warriors were mostly naked and had time to paint themselves. Armed with rifles, any Sioux warriors could match the firepower of any one trooper, and with such a massive advantage in numbers, the fighting was hopelessly one-sided. It didn't take long for the Sioux and Cheyenne to begin surrounding the Americans on 2 sides. Fearing an encirclement, the Americans mounted their horses and began retreating back up the hill. The native warriors pursued them all the way. They split into 2 groups who took different approaches to the battle. One group, which included Rain in the Face, charged directly into enemy lines, overrunning the Americans and striking them down with their clubs. Another group circled around to cut off the enemy's escape. This group was spearheaded by Crazy Horse, and it was they who decided where Custer and his men would have to make their final stand. Far from a dignified, organized retreat, according to Rain in the Face, that final stand was chaotic and brutal. He knew because he was the most brutal of all. Realizing they were surrounded, Custer's men dismounted to make their final stand at the top of the bluffs on the east bank of the Little Bighorn. Many used the bodies of their horses as cover as they tried to repel the overwhelming assault of the Sioux and Cheyenne. "We rushed like a wave does at the sand," Rain in the Face said. Dismounting may have been counterproductive. When fighting on foot, it was standard for 1 man out of 4 to hold the horses while the other 3 fought. The native warriors simply shot the men holding the horses first, knowing it would frighten the animals and send them running. The horses charged back into the American troops, causing chaos and knocking them down, and were easily captured by the native warriors and women. It was a frenzy. I had sung the war song. I had smelt the powder smoke. My heart was bad. I was like one that has no mind. I rushed in and took their flag. My pony fell dead as I took it. I cut the thong that bound me. I jumped up and brained the longsword flagman with my war club, and ran back to our line with the flag. In their final moments, many Americans threw down their rifles and resorted to their revolvers. The Springfield carbines they were using were infamous for jamming during a fight. Even during the battle, Rain in the Face noticed how often this was a problem for his enemy. They found dozens of jammed rifles after the battle that confirmed it. Bullets were precious to the Native Americans, so when they realized many of the Americans could no longer shoot, they closed in with arrows and clubs instead. Rain in the Face found a fresh horse and rejoined the fight just as the Americans broke apart. The next thing he remembered seeing was the American troops breaking apart. Some of the soldiers remounted and fled along the ridge toward Reno's position, he recalled. This was surely Lieutenant James Calhoun and Captain Miles Cogue, who separated from Custer before the final stand. They were followed by our warriors, like hundreds of blackbirds after a hawk, Rain in the Face said. The results were predictable. Lieutenant Calhoun and his men were surrounded on Calhoun Hill and slain. Captain Cogue and some of his men appear to have double-backed to try to rejoin Custer, but they too were wiped out. Native accounts and archaeological evidence agree that they fought fiercely to the last man. I had always thought that white men were cowards, Rain in the Face admitted, but I had a great respect for them after that day. However, there was nothing respectful about what Rain in the Face was about to do. Rain in the Face agrees that Custer would have been one of the last men standing. At the very least, the men around him were the last ones alive. As with every native eyewitness, American interviews pressed him for more information on Custer himself, but he had few clear answers. According to him, no one claimed the kill at the time. Rain in the Face believed that whoever killed Custer must have died shortly after, since any living warrior would have boasted about it. Someone unknown shot the chief, and he was probably killed also, for if not, he would have told others. However, he also said that no one reported recognizing Custer at that time either. The Sioux knew Custer by the nickname of Long-Haired Chief, but Custer had cut his famously long hair shorter a few weeks before the campaign. It's likely that the person who killed him simply didn't recognize him without the iconic features. Of course, there's no shortage of warriors who claimed the kill after the battle. The Cheyenne warriors Yellow Nose and Brave Bear, the Sioux warriors Lazy White Bull and White Cow Bull, and just some of the claimants. There were even claims that the warrior woman, Moving Robe, had been the one to kill him. Accounts cannot even agree on where he died. Some say he was shot while crossing the river into the camp. Others that he died where his body was later found. There are even those who believe that Custer took his own life to avoid being captured. The wounds to his body confirm that he was shot twice, but the simple fact is that we don't know who fired them, and Rain in the Face didn't know either. However, it was not for George Custer that Rain in the Face's name would go down in history. Rain in the Face's name would forever be remembered for his fulfillment of a terrifying promise made to Captain Tom Custer. Rain in the Face had a history with the younger Custer brother, who he knew as Little Hair. Back in 1873, Rain in the Face had killed an army veterinarian at the Battle of Honsinger Bluff. Tom Custer's men saw him do it but could not catch him and he escaped. The following year, however, Tom caught Rain in the Face and brought him back as a prisoner to the 7th Cavalry's headquarters at Fort Abraham Lincoln. Rain in the Face spent weeks in American captivity, chained in a tiny cell with a single blanket to keep him warm through the winter snow. Rain in the Face came to hate him. Tom Custer would torture and toy with him. They would pretend to release him just so they could chase him down and imprison him again. Rain in the Face promised his tormentor that if he ever escaped, he would come back to cut out his heart and eat it. Eventually, Rain in the Face did escape, but he never forgot the promise he made. Now at the Little Bighorn, Rain in the Face said he could finally fulfill his promise. I remembered my vow. I was crazy. I feared nothing. Rain in the Face claimed he lost count of how many soldiers he cut through to reach Tom Custer. The captain saw him coming. He knew me. I laughed at him and yelled at him. He was afraid. Rain in the Face closed in and shot Little Hair with his revolver. I leaped from my pony and cut out his heart and bit a piece out of it and spit it in his face. The promise had been fulfilled. Rain in the Face answers what happened to Custer's men, but he also reveals another important answer. The reason that the rest of the 7th Cavalry did not share Custer's fate was not because of their own strength, but because of a sudden crisis that tore the Sioux apart. After Custer's men were slaughtered, there was still the rest of the 7th Cavalry to deal with. Fortifying themselves atop Reno Hill, The remaining men of the 7th under Major Reno and Captain Benteen would have to hold out against enemy attacks until the next day. Rain-in-the-Face did not join them. He was tired of fighting. "I had had enough. I wanted to dance," he said. The Sioux and Cheyenne held a scalp dance that night to celebrate their victory and mourn their dead. American survivors vividly remember the native fires burning brightly in the camp, and the sounds of their whooping and wailing carrying up to Reno Hill. Although he didn't join the fighting, Rain-in-the-Face knew why it didn't end in another victory. On paper, it should have. The 350 or so survivors of the 7th were outnumbered by more than 10 to 1 by their enemy. Reno Hill wasn't an ideal defensive position to begin with, and a focused attack would have been devastating. Even the Americans believed this. For example, William Taylor of A Company said that if the Native Americans had launched a full assault, they would have easily wiped out the rest of the troopers. "It was indeed most fortunate for us that they did not," Taylor admitted. Rain-in-the-Face tells us why. According to him, Sitting Bull and Gall had a massive argument after the Custer fight. Sitting Bull had been making medicine during the battle while Gall had actually fought. Both men disagreed on who deserved credit for the victory, and it caused a terrible split. With the Sioux divided among themselves, they were too distracted to organize a combined attack. Rain-in-the-Face wanted no part in the argument, and refused to take a side before withdrawing to his lodge. Were it not for this fight destroying cooperation among the Sioux, Rain-in-the-Face said they'd have gone together to wipe out Reno's men too. Instead, that final attack never came. On the evening of the 26th, Sioux scouts spotted the approach of fresh American troops from the north. The time had come to pack up camp and seek the safety of the Bighorn Mountains. Rain-in-the-Face would live to see their great victory come to nothing. The Sioux were forced to flee north to Canada. Sitting Bull and Gall's argument caused the two men and their followers to go their separate ways, and by 1880, Rain-in-the-Face found himself on the Standing Rock Reservation. There, he gave his story to American interviewers at least twice, but the truth of what he said has been questioned ever since. In 1894, W. Kent Thomas visited Rain-in-the-Face to get his version of the battle. It was from this interview that the story of him eating Tom Custer's heart first reached the American public. But whether he was telling the truth, or even said it in the first place, is not so simple. Thomas had intentionally gotten Rain-in-the-Face drunk before the interview, so everything he said is immediately suspect. Thomas was also a journalist that was only interested in something exciting enough to get people's attention. It's also obvious that Thomas didn't like the old Sioux warrior, describing him as utterly heartless and unprincipled, physically brave but morally a coward. That raises the obvious question: did Thomas make up the heart-eating story for publicity? While some Native American groups like the Tonkawa did practice cannibalism, it wasn't a common practice among the Sioux or the Plains Indians in general. It would be highly unusual for a Sioux warrior to eat another human for any reason. However, cannibalism was a common stereotype invoked to demonize Native Americans throughout history. A man like Thomas, who openly hated his Native American subject, would probably have no issues with applying the stereotype in order to make his version of events more dramatic. The fact that Tom Custer's body was brutalized almost beyond recognition meant that no one could easily refute the claim either. Whatever the truth, it certainly worked. The story of Rain-in-the-Face eating Tom Custer's heart became one of the most well-known anecdotes of the battle. It was further popularized by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, The Revenge of Rain-in-the-Face, which echoes many other myths about that day. In 1906, another interviewer came to Rain-in-the-Face. The old warrior was now on his deathbed, but he was firm when he said that the stories told about him were wrong. "Many lies have been told of me. Some say I killed the chief, and others that I cut out the heart of his brother." The old warrior was emphatic that he never did either of those things. According to him and to many other Sioux warriors, the battle was too chaotic to recognize anyone. Most of them didn't even know Custer was there until days later. So did Rain-in-the-Face really eat Tom Custer's heart? It depends which version of his story you believe. "I have lived peaceably ever since we came upon the reservation," he said in his final days, but he still mourned the old life. Rain-in-the-Face was killed when he put down his weapons, the old warrior said. His spirit was gone then. Only his poor body lived on, but now it is almost ready to lie down for the last time. He may not have eaten the heart of his enemy like the stories claim, but the story of this accomplished warrior remains one of the most insightful native accounts of the Little Bighorn, and the last testament from a fascinating life.